Scott Mason believed everything had a price: loyalty, love, even family. In his world, control was the only thing that kept the wolves at bay and his empire from crumbling. He built that empire on ruthless ambition, and he expected the same devotion from everyone around him, especially the woman who bore his name. But tonight, for the first time in years, the ground shifted beneath him. New York shimmered below the glass fortress of Mason Tower. Reporters crowded the marble lobby, their flashes lighting up the dusk. Inside the boardroom, Scott stood at the head of the table, sharp suit, cold eyes, surrounded by advisors and his new wife. All of them were prepared for war. All of them thinking the next scandal would come from outside. No one expected the storm to come from the past. The elevator chimed. Heads turned. Haley stepped out, her chin high, her eyes fierce. Her children, twins, walked beside her, each holding her hand. They looked just like Scott. The room froze. For 10 years, Haley Mason's name was spoken only in whispers. The wife who failed, the woman Scott threw away. No one knew where she went. Some said she'd vanished for good. Others claimed she'd died of heartbreak. But here she was, stronger than ever, returning to the city that had chewed her up and spat her out, bringing the heirs everyone said she'd never have. The silence cracked when Harold Mason, Scott's father, barked, "Who let them in here?" Scott's heart thudded. He hadn't seen Haley since the night he ended their marriage. Since the night he'd told her, cold and certain, that she was nothing without him. And yet, as she met his gaze, he saw it. She didn't want him back. She wasn't begging for a second chance. She had something bigger, something that could shatter the very foundation of everything he'd built. The twins stood tall. The boy, Noah, carried himself like a young prince, defiant, steady. The girl, Nora, watched the room with wary intelligence, her hand squeezing Haley's as the adult stared. For a moment, the world held its breath. Welcome to Mr. Leonardo Stories. If you're new here, you're about to experience the kind of love, betrayal, and second chances that will shake you to your core. If you're a returning subscriber, thank you for being family. Before we dive in, do me one favor, hit that subscribe button right now. Like, share, and comment. Because this story is about to test everything you believe about loyalty, power, and what makes a real family. Scott tried to speak, but the words tangled in his throat. Haley's voice, when it came, was calm, measured, every syllable razor sharp. "I didn't come here to beg, Scott. I came for what belongs to my children." The boardroom erupted. Lawyers muttered. Harold's face turned red. Julia, Scott's second wife, glared at Haley with icy disdain. But Haley didn't flinch. "You thought you could erase me," she said, "but you forgot who I am. You forgot what we had. And you forgot that sometimes the things you throw away come back stronger." Scott's memories crashed into him. Late nights when Haley waited up for him. The heat of their first years, the slow drift into silence, the fights about children and duty. He'd told himself it was her fault, that she failed him. Now, looking at the twins, his children, he realized how wrong he'd been. "Why now?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Haley's eyes flickered with something raw. "Because I won't let you or your family decide who gets to matter. Not anymore. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." What would you do if the person who broke you now stood before you, holding the very thing you thought you'd never have? Have you ever felt like you weren't enough for someone you loved? Like you had to prove your worth, even when it broke your heart? This isn't just a story about money or power. It's about the fight for respect, the pain of betrayal, and the strength it takes to reclaim your life. Stay with us to the end. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated, only to rise stronger than anyone expected? I want to hear your story. As cameras flashed and voices rose, Scott realized the real battle wasn't about money or reputation or even legacy. It was about Haley, her pride, her love, her refusal to be erased, and the twins, living proof that sometimes the things you abandon become the only things worth fighting for. Welcome to a story where the stakes are real, the romance is slow burning, and messy, and every moment is a chance at redemption or ruin. Are you ready? Let's begin. Long before the headlines, before the lawsuits, before the children's faces on glossy magazine covers, there was only Scott and Haley, a love story that looked perfect from the outside, but which carried a hidden price. Scott Mason didn't fall for Haley Harper because of her pedigree, though she came from money. He was drawn to her sharp wit, her effortless grace, the way she made a crowded room feel like it was only the two of them. They met at a charity auction, Scott bidding too much on a piece of modern art, Haley laughing softly behind a champagne glass. She told him the painting was ugly, that the artist's arrogance was almost as big as yours. He liked her right then, because she didn't flinch, didn't play along, didn't act impressed by his last name. Haley wasn't the kind of woman who fell easily either. She'd been burned before. She'd watched her parents' marriage collapse under the weight of secrets, and she'd promised herself she would never become her mother, beautiful, lonely, constantly waiting for love to return home. Yet Scott was relentless. He sent flowers. He texted at midnight. He took her to rooftop dinners, told her about his dreams, his fears, his belief that he was meant for more. On their third date, he admitted, "I want the world, Haley, and I want you with me when I take it." She told him, "You're used to getting what you want." He grinned. "I'm used to working for what I want." That was the difference, she thought. Scott didn't wait for life to happen. He made things happen. Haley respected that drive, that focus. She'd grown up around men who talked big and delivered small, men who retreated at the first sign of discomfort. Scott was different. He wanted her to be his equal, to stand by his side, not behind him. Their courtship was a spectacle. New York's social scene watched them with fascination and envy. Haley was elegant in a way that didn't need effort. Scott was bold, reckless, a self-made billionaire who kept climbing. They became a power couple, shorthand in every column. Their wedding was black tie, swarming with cameras, celebrities, the city's old money and new. Scott's father, Harold, smiled stiffly during the ceremony, barely masking his pride and his expectations. Scott leaned close to Haley that night, dancing under crystal chandeliers, and whispered, "We'll show them what real partnership looks like." Haley, a little tipsy, kissed him and believed him. The first years were a blur of red carpets, charity balls, luxury vacations, and secret getaways. Scott worked endless hours but always made time for Haley, midnight calls from Hong Kong, spontaneous trips to Paris, long weekends in the Hamptons. When they were alone, the walls came down. He talked about childhood loneliness, growing up in a mansion that felt like a museum, a father who measured affection in achievements and numbers. Haley saw through the arrogance. She saw the boy who never felt enough. She loved him fiercely, promising to be the one thing he didn't have to earn. At home, their chemistry was electric. They fought hard, loved harder, and made up in sheets tangled with passion and apology. Scott was possessive, not out of insecurity but out of awe. He truly believed. Haley was too good for him, and he let her know every night. They built rituals, Sunday mornings with coffee on the terrace, bookshop dates, slow dancing in the kitchen. Haley learned the language of Scott's ambition, how to help him strategize, soothe him when deals went south, and build his confidence before boardroom battles. He called her his compass, the only person whose opinion he trusted above his own. For a while, that was enough. The cracks began with whispers, family, friends, strangers with opinions. No little Masons yet. They'd tease at galas. "You two are too busy for kids?" It started as a joke, but with each passing month, the pressure grew. Scott's father, Harold, became more direct. At every family dinner, he'd ask about the next generation. He'd joke, "Mason men have always had strong heirs. Don't tell me you're breaking traditions, son." Scott laughed it off in public, but at home, he started counting days, marking calendars, bringing home fertility brochures. Haley felt the tension. She wanted a child, but the joy was overshadowed by expectation. Her body became a scoreboard, her value measured in pregnancy tests and monthly cycles. She told herself it was natural, that they had time. But Scott's need grew more urgent. The first doctor's appointment was hopeful, blood work, charts and medical advice. The second was cautious optimism. The third, after another negative test, was a hard truth. Some couples take longer. There's nothing wrong with you. But Scott heard failure. Hayley felt herself shrinking. Nights grew quieter. The laughter faded, replaced by tense silence and the hum of Scott's laptop late into the night. They tried everything. Timed routines, medication, specialist appointments. Hayley kept a brave face, but the joy was gone. She saw herself in the mirror, wondered where the woman who sparkled at Gallus had gone. She caught Scott staring at her, not with love, but with calculation. Was she worth all the waiting? Sex became mechanical, timed for best results, passion replaced by pressure. Scott grew more distracted. He threw himself into work, building Mason Industries into an empire. He came home later and later, blaming the market, the board, the investors, never admitting he was running from the quiet. Hayley tried to reach him, planned surprise dates, and left him notes. He'd smile, kiss her forehead, say, "Thanks, Hales," and turn away. The distance became a wall neither could cross. One night, after another failed cycle, Hayley curled up in bed and whispered, "I'm sorry." Scott didn't answer. He was already asleep, or pretending to be. Behind closed doors, Hayley wept. In public, she smiled. Scott's father pressured him more. "If she can't give you what you need, find someone who will." "You have a duty, son," Scott snapped. "It's not her fault." But the words grew hollow over time. Hayley heard every word, every whisper. She found comfort in friends, some loyal, some only there for the gossip. The tabloids began to circle, speculating on their marriage, on Hayley's failure. Headlines stung: billionaire's wife, empty cradle, empty home. Hayley threw herself into charity work, trying to reclaim a sense of purpose. Scott saw it as a distraction, resented her for it, wanted her home more, and wanted her focused on the problem. The love that had felt like fire now felt like ice. They argued more. The fights were sharp, unkind, neither willing to yield. Scott accused Hayley of giving up. Hayley accused Scott of turning her into a project. Words that couldn't be unsaid lingered between them. The night everything changed. Rain battered the windows. Hayley waited up, heart pounding. Scott came home late, tie loose, jaw set. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a long time. She asked, voice shaking, "Do you even love me anymore?" He didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "I love what we were. I don't know what we are now." It was the most honest thing he'd said in months. They slept in separate rooms. In the morning, Hayley found her wedding ring on the nightstand. In the world outside, nothing changed. They attended functions, posed for photos, and told the story everyone wanted to hear. But the truth was a private ache, a fracture in the foundation no one could see. Scott tried to bury himself in business, but every deal, every victory felt hollow. Hayley felt herself disappearing, her dreams, her identity, her sense of belonging all fading. Still, some part of her hoped. Some part of her believed love could find its way back. But the world keeps moving, and even the strongest marriages can crack. Beneath the weight of expectation, ambition, and silent heartbreak, the storm was coming. Neither of them saw how close it was. Rain blurred the New York skyline, softening the city's harsh edges and filling the Mason penthouse with a lonely kind of quiet. Hayley stared at her reflection in the tall windows, tracing raindrops as they crawled down the glass. She could almost remember the early years, the sound of Scott's laughter, the warm weight of his arms. Now, their home felt colder each day. She tried to remember the last time Scott had looked at her with desire, real, hungry, unfiltered. Months, maybe longer. They still played their parts in public, but inside these walls, the silence was deafening. She heard the elevator doors open. Her pulse quickened, a mix of hope and dread. Scott rarely came home before midnight anymore, and when he did, the air thickened with things unsaid. Hayley forced a smile as he entered, but Scott's eyes skimmed past her, his shoulders tense under his drenched suit. He dropped his briefcase by the door, loosened his tie, and poured a drink. "Late meeting," he said, avoiding her gaze. "Of course," Haley replied, voice small. She watched him drink, watched the city behind him, both of them pretending to be strangers in their own home. Scott broke the silence first. "Did you make the appointment?" Haley nodded. "Tomorrow morning. Dr. Klein wants us both there." He finished his drink. "Fine." She wanted to tell him how scared she was, how tired. She wanted to say she missed him. Instead, she whispered, "We'll figure this out." Scott's reply was almost a whisper. "We keep saying that." They sat in the quiet, the distance between them stretching until it felt like another country. The next morning, the doctor's office was cold, clinical, full of hope and disappointment. Dr. Klein explained new options, tests, medication, time. Scott listened, arms folded, jaw tight. Haley answered questions, nodded in all the right places, but felt numb. Driving home, Scott stared out the window. "How long are we supposed to keep doing this?" Haley flinched. "As long as it takes." Scott's hand tightened on the wheel. "Is that what you want? Or what do you think I want?" She looked at him, stung. "I want a family. With you. Isn't that enough?" He didn't answer. At home, Scott vanished into his office. Haley made tea, but she didn't drink it. She tried calling her sister, but hung up before anyone answered. She wandered the penthouse, passing framed photos, wedding, vacations, parties, evidence of another life. That night, Haley lay awake, listening for Scott's footsteps. He never came to bed. Days bled into weeks. The only intimacy between them was obligation. Sex was a chore, scheduled by apps and ovulation calendars, stripped of passion or tenderness. Scott rarely kissed her. Sometimes, after, he turned away, falling into a restless sleep. Haley felt invisible. She showered longer, hoping hot water would wash away the ache of being unwanted. She wore silk lingerie, but he never noticed. She counted days, then weeks, then months. One afternoon, after another negative test, Haley broke down in the shower. She pressed her hands to her stomach and sobbed, desperate, angry, ashamed. She wanted to blame someone, God, fate, herself, maybe even Scott. She dried her tears before he got home, hiding the evidence with makeup and a practiced smile. Scott didn't notice. Pressure from Harold Mason mounted. Every family dinner ended with a pointed joke, a veiled threat. "A Mason with no heir is no Mason at all," he'd say. Scott bristled but never defended her in front of his father. Afterward, he sulked or left, leaving Haley to finish her wine alone. Even their friends started to pull away. No one wanted to witness a marriage unravel. Gossip spread in the social pages, speculation about fertility, about infidelity, about why the beautiful couple couldn't seal the deal. Haley stopped reading the papers. Scott worked longer hours. He traveled more, taking meetings in London, Shanghai, anywhere but home. When he returned, he was tired, distant, half listening to Haley's attempts at conversation. He drank more, laughed less. She begged him for a weekend away, to escape the pressure. "Maybe we need to remember what it was like before," she said. Scott agreed, but when the day came, he cancelled for a last-minute board meeting. Haley went alone, checked into a hotel, and cried herself to sleep in a room built for two. Spring came, but the chill between them remained. Dr. Klein recommended one last procedure, risky, expensive, the final hope. Haley agreed. Scott paid the bill without comment. After the procedure failed, Scott never spoke of it again. Haley woke up one morning and realized he'd stopped trying. He didn't even ask how she felt. She tried to talk to him that night. "I can't do this alone, Scott." He stood by the window, back to her. "I'm tired of feeling helpless. I'm tired of watching you suffer." Her voice shook. "We're supposed to suffer together. That's what marriage is." He finally faced her, eyes cold. "Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, Haley, not punishment." She stared at him, heart racing. "So what do you want?" Scott didn't answer. He left the room. One evening, Haley found herself sitting at the piano, playing the same melody she'd played the night Scott proposed. She wondered if he remembered. She wondered if anything could bring them back. She found him in his office, pouring another drink. "We can try again," she said, desperate. Scott shook his head. "I don't want to try any more." The room spun. Haley felt the finality in his voice. "What are you saying?" He stared at her, unflinching, unkind. "I need an heir. You can't give me that." The words hit her like a slap. Haley stood, trembling, breath coming in short, angry bursts. "So you want a divorce?" Scott didn't look away. "I want what's best for both of us. Maybe we're holding each other back." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You promised me forever." Scott's voice broke. Forever was before this. She turned and walked out, footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. She didn't sleep that night. She packed a small bag, left her wedding ring on his pillow, and wrote a single line on a notepad by the bed. "I hope you find what you're looking for." The next morning, Scott found the note. He held it, knuckles white, fighting the urge to chase after her. Instead, he called his lawyer. Haley left with nothing but her name, and a heart split open. She walked out of the building into the cold spring air, her whole life packed in a single suitcase. The doorman watched her go, pity in his eyes. She ignored him. She hailed a cab and disappeared into the city. Upstairs, Scott Mason poured another drink and stared at the space she left behind. He didn't know it yet, but this would be the last night he'd ever sleep soundly. Haley didn't look back when the cab pulled away from the Mason building. For the first time in years, she wasn't anyone's wife or project. She was a woman alone, holding nothing but a phone, a battered suitcase, and the echo of Scott's last words. New York blurred by as she pressed her forehead to the window. The city felt different now, colder, bigger, and merciless. She'd built her entire adult life around Scott's world. Now, that world had spit her out. She stayed in a small hotel downtown that first night, clutching the pillow until sunrise. The silence was crushing, yet it was hers. There was no one to perform for, no family dinners to endure, no charity events or polite conversations about baby names. Just the ache of loss and the hum of distant traffic. She showered, changed into jeans and a sweater, and stared at her reflection. No makeup, hair pulled back, eyes rimmed with grief. She almost didn't recognize herself. Haley called her sister, only to hang up before the call connected. She wasn't ready to explain, not ready to hear "I told you so." Instead, she let herself cry, real, unguarded sobs. When the tears finally stopped, she wiped her face, took a shaky breath, and promised herself that if she was going to break, she would do it alone. The next day she found a quiet cafe in the village, nursing black coffee while scrolling through apartment listings. Every option felt foreign, even frightening. Scott's money could have bought her anything, but her pride wouldn't allow it. She was determined to do this without help. She sent out applications, called agents, and, when she ran out of steam, wandered the city for hours. She watched couples with strollers, smiled at street performers, and let herself blend into the crowd. She signed a lease for a one-bedroom walk-up in Brooklyn, tiny, with peeling paint and leaky faucets, but hers. The landlord didn't recognize her from the tabloids, or pretended not to. Haley paid with the last of her savings, holding back fear with every signature. The first night in her new apartment, she sat on the bare mattress, knees tucked to her chest, and wondered what came next. The days passed in a daze. She picked up odd jobs, assistant at a florist, weekend shifts at a bookstore, even cleaning apartments for extra cash. She kept busy, if only to drown out the loneliness. She missed the comfort of a home that didn't feel like exile, the warmth of belonging somewhere. But with each day, her grief dulled. She learned the subway, made friends with her neighbors, and started to find small joys, a hot meal, a friendly smile, the peace of a quiet evening alone. Months passed. One late night, after a double shift, Haley fell asleep fully clothed on her bed. She woke before dawn, nauseous and dizzy. She chalked it up to exhaustion, then brushed it off when it happened again. But after 3 weeks of queasy mornings and sudden tears, she realized what she'd missed. Her period never came. She stared at the calendar, counting days, disbelief building with each crossed box. Her hands shook as she bought a pregnancy test, avoiding eye contact with the cashier. Back in her apartment, she sat on the edge of the tub, watching the seconds crawl by. When the result appeared, she covered her mouth with her hand and wept, first from shock, then relief, then something close to joy. Hayley was pregnant. After all the years of heartbreak and loss, after being told her body was the problem, after Scott's accusations and her own doubts, she was carrying a life. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long time, feeling the universe's twisted sense of humor. It was almost cruel. She was alone, broke, abandoned. But finally, her body worked. 1,000 questions followed. Should she call Scott? Tell him he was going to be a father after all? The thought left her cold. He hadn't fought for her, hadn't listened, hadn't believed. She owed him nothing. The next weeks blurred. She made a doctor's appointment at a small clinic across town, hiding her nerves beneath a steady voice. The nurse smiled as she squeezed Hayley's hand. The sonogram revealed not one, but 2 tiny heartbeats. Twins. Hayley burst out laughing, a wild, unfiltered joy that shocked the nurse and herself. Twins. She thought of all those cold nights, the angry words, the loneliness. For a moment, it almost felt like winning. The fear returned quickly. How would she raise 2 children on her own? How would she afford diapers, food, and a safe home? Still, she made her decision. She would protect these babies with everything she had. She would never let anyone make them feel unwanted or less than. The pregnancy was hard. Morning sickness lasted all day, and her old apartment's stairs became a nightmare. She picked up fewer shifts, forced to quit the florist job when the hours became too much. Her landlord was kind, giving her extra time for rent. Her neighbors left groceries at her door, slipped notes of encouragement under her mat. For the first time, Hayley felt the kindness of strangers, the quiet network of community that never made headlines. She didn't call her family until she was 5 months along, belly rounding beneath loose sweaters. Her sister, shocked and angry at first, soon became her biggest supporter. She flew in from Chicago for appointments, brought supplies, and held Hayley's hand during the rough days. They made lists of names, argued about nursery colors, and laughed late into the night. Hayley worked hard to save every dollar. She read books on single parenting, learned to cook simple meals, and sewed little blankets for her babies. She stopped checking social media, blocked numbers she didn't recognize, and shut out the world she'd left behind. As her due date approached, fear returned. She had nightmares, Scott showing up, demanding the children, fighting her for custody. She worried she'd fail, that she'd be like her own mother, abandoned and bitter. But every time the twins kicked, every time she sang them to sleep with her, hand on her belly, she remembered her promise. They would never feel unloved. When labor came, it was fast and fierce. Her sister was there, holding her through the pain, whispering, "You're not alone." Hours later, Hayley held her children. Noah first, strong and stubborn, then Nora, tiny but fierce. Hayley wept with joy, exhaustion, and a fierce pride she never knew she had. Those first months were brutal, nights with no sleep, bottles and diapers, crying until dawn. Hayley made mistakes, doubted herself, and broke down more than once. But every morning, when Noah and Nora curled against her, their breaths warm and real, she found the strength to keep going. She never told Scott. She convinced herself it was better this way. She'd been erased from his life, but she was building something new, something stronger, something hers. As the years passed, Hayley built a life for her little family. She took online courses, earned a certification in project management, and landed a job with a startup run by a single mom who understood. Her income grew. She moved to a bigger apartment, one with 2 bedrooms and sun streaming through the windows in the morning. Noah and Nora grew into curious, bright-eyed children. Hayley taught them about love, resilience, and the power of their own voices. She told them, "We're a team. We fight for each other." They didn't have the Mason name, but they had each other and her. She missed Scott sometimes, in the quiet moments after the twins fell asleep. She missed what they'd once had, what might have been if he'd chosen love over legacy. But every time she tucked her children in at night, Hayley knew she'd made the right choice. She never regretted walking away. Years later, on a quiet morning in Brooklyn, as the twins tumbled across the living room floor, Hayley stood at the window and watched the city wake. She had no idea her past would come looking for her again, or that everything she'd built was about to be tested. For now, she simply breathed, free, whole, and unbreakable. Scott Mason's world did not slow down when Hayley disappeared. The city, the company, and the relentless pursuit of more never paused for regret. The papers reported on the amicable split, speculated on her sudden exit, and soon moved on. Inside Mason Tower, the old rhythms returned: deals, meetings, networking, endless hours at the office. But nothing felt the same. Scott told himself he had made the only logical decision. Legacy mattered. Duty mattered. He convinced himself that love was a distraction, a beautiful myth that only led to disappointment. In the weeks after Hayley left, he buried himself in work. The company expanded into new markets, profits soared, and the board praised his vision. Every night, he returned to an empty penthouse, pouring drinks he didn't finish and staring out at the city lights that once promised everything. Harold Mason, his father, wasted no time. "You did the right thing, son. A real man knows when to make the hard choices." He pushed Scott to remarry quickly, to find a suitable woman who could deliver, the next Mason heir, and seal the family's dominance in business and society. At first, Scott resisted. Hayley's absence was a ghost in every room, a perfume he caught in the hallway, a half-read book left on the nightstand, a laugh echoing in his memory when the apartment was quiet. But soon, under mounting pressure, he relented. Julia was everything Harold wanted: wealthy, poised, unflappable. She was a fixture in Manhattan's social scene, her family name opening doors even Mason money could not. Julia understood the game: appearances over affection, power over passion. She was beautiful, but cold in a way that never thawed, even behind closed doors. Their courtship was fast, efficient, and public. Julia smiled for the cameras, shook hands with shareholders, and hosted dinner parties that made the society columns swoon. Scott let himself be swept along by the current. Their wedding was perfect, every detail measured and manicured. He barely remembered the vows, only the emptiness in Julia's eyes as they promised each other forever. Marriage to Julia was a negotiation, not a romance. They lived parallel lives, two professionals sharing the same address, never the same dreams. She took her meals in her own suite, traveled often for charity work and shopping, and filled the house with expensive silence. In bed, their bodies met out of obligation, not longing. Scott missed the heat, the laughter, the simple intimacy he'd had with Hayley. Sex with Julia was transactional, both of them retreating into their own heads. When it was over, she'd turn away, already asleep. He tried to convince himself this was normal. This was what powerful families did. He told himself Hayley had been a lesson, a warning against loving too much. Some nights, as he lay in the dark, he'd remember the soft curve of Hayley's back, her laugh in the kitchen, the way she'd look at him like he was more than a last name. He shut his eyes and tried to forget. As the months rolled on, Julia made her expectations clear. She wanted children, but on her timeline, with her terms. When their efforts led to nothing, she shrugged it off, refusing to see more doctors or try harder. "We have time," she'd say. "I have other priorities." Scott was trapped in the same cycle, measuring months, watching for signs, disappointed but too proud to admit it. Work became his only escape. He traveled constantly: London, Tokyo, Dubai, chasing deals, shaking hands, making speeches. Mason Industries grew larger and more powerful, but Scott felt smaller each year. The more he achieved, the more hollow he became. The city noticed the change. Friends commented on his absence, the way he seemed always distracted, short-tempered, and cold. Harold grew impatient, pressing for updates on heirs, hinting at his own mortality. "I won't live forever, Scott. The company needs a future. Scott bit back his frustration, resenting the pressure, the legacy that never let him breathe. Julia became a master of avoidance. She hired a full staff to manage the house, traveled with friends, and spent weekends in the Hamptons or Paris. They shared a name, not a marriage. When she was home, she filled the penthouse with guests. Loud, shallow parties that made Scott feel lonelier than ever. Sometimes, when the noise became too much, Scott would slip out onto the balcony, scotch in hand, and stare at the city below. He wondered where Hayley was, if she'd rebuilt her life, if she hated him as much as he hated himself for letting her go. On one cold night, after a particularly tense dinner with Harold and Julia, Scott returned to his office. He opened a drawer and pulled out a faded photograph, him and Hayley, laughing at a summer party, her hair caught by the wind. He stared at it for a long time, anger and regret twisting together in his chest. He tried to date other women. Brief, passionless encounters, beautiful strangers who wanted a taste of the Mason life, not the man himself. Each time, he felt emptier, more invisible. They didn't know him, didn't care to. The years ticked by. Scott's life became an endless loop, meetings, flights, silent meals, and empty rooms. Julia stopped pretending to care. They became business partners, each playing their part for the cameras and the board. She pursued her interests. He poured himself into work. In rare moments of honesty, Scott admitted he was lost. He'd sacrificed love for legacy, and ended up with neither. He couldn't say when the loneliness started to suffocate him, only that it was always there now, lurking behind every success, every empty victory. And always, in the back of his mind, Hayley's voice haunted him. Her laughter, her pain, the look in her eyes the night she left. He wondered if she'd ever forgive him, if she even should. He poured another drink, staring at the city, and wondered how a man who had everything could feel like he had nothing at all. He didn't know it yet, but everything he'd built was about to be shaken by the one person he'd cast out and the two children he'd never believed possible. The first winter with twins was nothing like Hayley had imagined when she once pictured herself as a mother in a grand apartment. Scott at her side. It was raw, exhausting, beautiful, and achingly real. Brooklyn's streets were noisy and alive, snow swirling through the cracks in the old windows. In their small apartment, Hayley bundled Noah and Nora in thrift store blankets, humming lullabies to hush their cries as the world beyond faded away. Every day was a test. There were moments when both babies screamed at once, and she felt like she was drowning. Nights when she rocked one child with one arm, bottle-fed the other, and blinked back tears of fatigue. She'd rest her forehead against the crib and whisper, "We're going to be okay. We have to be." Those nights, her sister's calls kept her sane. Sometimes, just hearing another adult voice was enough. Money was always tight. Hayley clipped coupons, bought groceries with careful math, and learned to do without. She watched other mothers at the park and tried not to envy their ease or their strollers with wheels that didn't stick. Her pride wouldn't let her ask Scott for a cent, and she kept her name off every public radar, not wanting a trace back to the Masons. She was terrified of the press, of Harold, of anyone who might take the twins away from her. She became anonymous by choice. Yet the tiny family grew stronger every month. Noah was curious, loud and stubborn, his brown eyes always searching for new mischief. Nora was watchful, quick to smile, content to sit with her mother and trace shapes in the sunlight that streamed across their faded rug. Hayley read to them every night, books she borrowed from the library, stories about bravery, belonging, and the importance of kindness. She built her days around small rituals, pancakes on Sundays, walks to the park when the weather allowed, singing in the kitchen as she made dinner. The children grew healthy, clever, and joyful, the apartment filling with their laughter. Sometimes, Hayley would catch her own reflection in the kitchen window, tired, older, but stronger than she'd ever imagined. When Noah and Nora started preschool, Hayley's anxiety returned. Would the teachers notice their last name? Would anyone ask about their father? But the kids adjusted quickly. They made friends, brought home art projects, and told their mother stories about the world outside their little home. Hayley felt pride, and a pang of sadness. She'd kept them safe, but she knew she couldn't shelter them forever. As the twins grew, their resemblance to Scott sharpened. Strangers often commented, "They look like someone famous." Haley smiled and brushed it off. At night, she watched them sleep and saw their father in every stubborn tilt of Noah's jaw, every thoughtful look Nora gave when she was deep in concentration. Still, she never wavered. She reminded them often, "Your worth isn't given by anyone's name. You decide who you are." She wanted them to know their roots, but not be trapped by them. She taught them about respect, empathy, and standing up for themselves. The lessons weren't always easy. Brooklyn could be tough, and there were times when the twins came home upset or confused by the world's meanness. Haley encouraged honesty. When Noah got into a fight at school, she didn't scold him. She listened. "Why did you hit him?" she asked gently, and Noah replied, "He said we didn't have a dad like everyone else." Haley hugged him tightly. "You have a family, and you're loved. No one gets to tell you what makes a family." She wrote a note to the school, but mostly she showed her children by example what real courage looked like. She built a small network of friends, other single mothers, neighbors, teachers, people who cared, who looked out for the twins when Haley was late from work. She became part of a community, one built not by blood or money, but by kindness and shared struggle. Birthdays were celebrated with homemade cake and laughter. Christmas meant hand-me-down gifts, but always the promise of love. At night, when the twins finally slept, Haley sometimes sat in the living room and let herself remember. The sound of Scott's laughter, the weight of his arms, the dreams they'd shared once upon a time. She wondered if he thought of her at all, if he ever missed what they had, or if he was truly happier now, living the life his father always wanted for him. But as the months slipped into years, the ache of missing Scott faded. What remained was gratitude. Haley had survived heartbreak, loneliness, and fear, and built something better, something that was hers. She was proud of the woman she'd become. The pain had given her grit. The betrayal had given her wisdom. The love she poured into Noah and Nora had made her whole again. She finished her project management certification and was promoted at work. The twins started grade school, winning awards for kindness and curiosity. Sometimes, Haley thought about reaching out to Scott, to tell him, to show him the children he'd once claimed she could never give. But every time she considered it, she remembered the woman she used to be, waiting, hoping, measuring her worth by his approval. She didn't want to be that woman again. Instead, she focused on the future. She saved every spare dollar, planning for the day her children would want to see more of the world. She dreamed of taking them to Europe, of letting them see beauty and possibility far beyond the Mason name. Then, on a spring day just before the twins' 10th birthday, an envelope arrived, heavy, formal, bearing the Mason family crest. Haley's heart pounded as she opened it, the old fear rushing. Back, inside was a letter, legal, cold, but unmistakable. Harold Mason had found them. The past she'd so carefully hidden was at her door. Haley tucked her children into bed that night, brushing their hair back, kissing their cheeks. She watched them sleep, peaceful and unburdened, and promised herself again, no one would ever make them feel small or unwanted. They deserved the world, not because of their blood, but because of their hearts. As she lay awake, listening to the city, she knew a storm was coming. But Haley was no longer afraid. She had learned how to survive, and now she was ready to fight. The morning Haley decided to return to Manhattan, she woke before dawn. The city was quiet, just the sound of delivery trucks and the distant rumble of the subway beneath her window. She made coffee, stood at the kitchen sink, and watched the first light creep over Brooklyn. 10 years had passed since she'd walked away from everything she knew, but the past was never far behind. Now, with the Mason letter staring at her from the kitchen table, there was no more hiding. Noah and Nora sat across from her, legs swinging, still sleepy. She saw Scott in every line of their faces, a truth she could no longer keep from them. Haley slid the envelope across the table. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm but firm. "About your father, about where you come from." She told them everything. The good, the love story that had once made her believe in forever. The bad, the disappointment, the heartbreak, the exile. She answered every question, even when her voice shook. Noah listened in silence, his jaw set with the same stubbornness that haunted his father. Nora wiped her eyes, her small hand curling into Haley's. "Are we going to meet him?" Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Haley nodded. "It's time, but we do this as a family, together, on our terms." Packing was easy. Their life had never been about things. Haley chose simple clothes for the twins, sensible shoes. Nothing that screamed wealth or invited the gaze of old money. She steeled herself for the scrutiny of the press, of the Masons, of every judge and lawyer who'd try to write the twins out of history. On the train to Manhattan, Haley held her children's hands tight. The city rose around them, gleaming and indifferent, a place that once spat her out and now called her back for battle. Noah peered out the window, and Nora dozed on Haley's shoulder. Haley stared straight ahead, heart pounding, already planning every move. They arrived at Mason Tower just before noon, the lobby alive with security, assistants, and the quiet hum of power. Haley announced her name at the desk. The receptionist blanched, but made the call. Within minutes, a team of lawyers and security swept them upstairs. The boardroom doors opened. Scott was there, older but unchanged, same sharp suit, same restless energy. His eyes landed on Haley first, a flicker of disbelief, then calculation. When he saw the twins, the mask slipped. Shock, guilt, something else, fear, maybe, or the beginning of awe. Harold Mason sat at the far end of the table, flanked by attorneys and advisors. Julia was there too, her lips pressed tight, arms folded in icy disbelief. The room buzzed with whispers as Haley led Noah and Nora to the table. She said nothing at first, letting the silence build. Scott's eyes darted between her and the twins, his jaw clenched, every muscle rigid. For a long time, no one moved. Finally, Scott spoke. "What is this?" Haley answered with the same calm that had gotten her through every lonely night. "This is your family, the one you tried to erase." Julia's voice was cold, brittle. "You can't just walk in here." Haley cut her off, gentle but unyielding. "I'm not here for you. I'm here for them." Noah and Nora stood tall, refusing to shrink under the weight of the Mason name. Haley squeezed their hands. "You always wanted an heir, Scott. Now you have two." Harold leaned forward, his gaze hard. "You expect us to accept this? You left. You hid them. How do we know they're even yours?" Haley reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Birth certificates, medical records, and DNA tests. She placed them on the table, her hand steady. "Everything you need is there, every answer. I protected my children because I knew you'd try to take them from me. I'm not here to beg for a seat at your table. I'm here to make sure my children get what's rightfully theirs." The attorneys murmured, flipping through the documents. Scott stared at the twins, realization dawning. For the first time in years, he saw the truth he'd refused to face. They looked so much like him it hurt. Julia rose, her voice shaking with rage. "This is a shakedown." Haley met her eyes. "No, this is justice." Scott stood. "Why now?" Haley's answer was soft but strong. "Because they deserve to know who they are. And because I'm done letting anyone decide our worth." The room dissolved into chaos. Lawyers argued, Harold threatened, and Julia stormed out. But Haley stood her ground. The twins never looked away. When the boardroom emptied, Scott lingered. He tried to speak, but words failed him. Instead, he knelt in front of the twins, searching their faces for some sign of himself. Noah bristled. Nora blinked away tears. Scott looked up at Haley, pain and regret warring in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible. Haley's expression softened, but only for a moment. "Sorry doesn't change the past. What matters is what you do next." They left Mason Tower that afternoon, heads high. Reporters snapped photos, headlines blared the news. Billionaire's hidden heirs revealed. Haley shielded the twins from the frenzy, ushered them back to Brooklyn, and tried to pretend life could go on as usual. But she knew it was only the beginning. The next weeks were a blur. Lawyers called, journalists camped outside their building, strangers sent letters of support and hate. Haley blocked it all out, focusing only on the twins, helping them understand the new world swirling around them, reminding them daily, "You are enough. You don't need anyone's name to know who you are." Noah acted tough, but Haley saw the questions burning inside. Nora became quieter, sticking close to her mother's side. The city felt smaller, more dangerous. But Haley refused to run. She walked the kids to school, shopped at the same markets, and met every stare with calm defiance. One evening after dinner, Haley found Scott waiting outside their apartment building. He looked smaller, tired, less certain than she'd ever seen him. "Can we talk?" he asked. Haley let him in, set out coffee, and watched him struggle for words. "I never thought you'd leave," he admitted. "I thought you'd always be there, waiting." She nodded. "I was done waiting." He looked at the twins, then at her. "I want to know them. I want to try." Haley considered him for a long time. "You can try. But you don't get to control the terms. They decide when they're ready. And so do I." Scott accepted. There was no fight left in him, just regret and the faint hope of redemption. That night, as Haley tucked Noah and Nora into bed, she whispered, "You are loved. You always have been." The world outside raged on, but within those four walls, they were safe. Together. Haley knew the battle was far from over. The Masons would fight. The city would judge. But she was ready. She was done running. Now, she would stand and claim what was hers. The storm arrived fast. The city was abuzz. Social media was flooded with rumors, and news trucks parked outside their building. In boardrooms and brownstones, the question was the same. Would the Mason family accept the twins? And at what cost? Haley refused to let fear run her life. Every morning, she walked Noah and Nora to school, head high. She met every stare, every whisper, with calm dignity. She kept their lives as normal as possible, knowing normal might never come again. The first attack came from Harold Mason. His lawyers filed motions questioning Haley's fitness as a mother, raising doubts about the twins' legitimacy despite irrefutable DNA tests. The letters grew uglier, the threats bolder. They offered money, hush deals, settlements, blank checks to disappear again. Haley turned down every offer. Scott called often, apologizing for his father, asking for time with the twins. Haley allowed visits, supervised and cautious. The kids were wary. Noah pushed back, stubborn as ever, while Nora watched Scott with searching eyes, curious but slow to trust. Haley watched Scott struggle. He wanted connection, but had never learned how to be gentle. The twins asked questions. Why did he let you go? Why did he say we couldn't exist? Haley answered with honesty, never painting Scott as a villain but never protecting him from the truth. Julia's reaction was colder. She paraded the Mason name at charity events and scorned Haley in the press, dismissing the twins as unwelcome complications. She moved out for weeks at a time, leaving Scott in a penthouse that felt emptier than ever. The media coverage was relentless. Photos of the twins on playgrounds, headlines dissecting Haley's every move. Commentators debated whether the children belonged, if Haley was a gold digger, if Scott should fight for custody, or simply write them off. Haley shielded Noah and Nora as best she could, teaching them not to believe everything they heard, but the weight of judgment pressed down. In the boardroom, the fight grew brutal. Harold tried to cut the twins out of the family trust, to rewrite the will in Julia's favor, to pit Scott against Haley. But Haley had come prepared. She hired a lawyer who believed in justice, who dug up every document, every medical record, every timeline. She showed the world the truth. The twins were Mason heirs by blood and by law, and no amount of intimidation could erase that. Meetings dragged on for hours. Attorneys barked questions. Harold's temper flared. He threatened to ruin Haley, to take the children, to bury her in lawsuits until she broke. Haley listened, stone-faced, her hand never leaving Nora's shoulder. Scott began to see his father differently. He saw the cruelty, the manipulation, the legacy of men who valued their name more than their children. He tried to speak up, tried to defend Haley and the twins. It wasn't enough. Harold called him weak, blamed Haley for corrupting the family. Scott found himself pulled between loyalty and love, and the pressure nearly broke him. Noah and Nora felt the strain. At home, Noah lashed out, angry at the world, while Nora grew quiet, retreating into books and drawing. Haley spent sleepless nights holding them, whispering that they were strong, that they belonged, that no one could take away what made them special. Haley's friends rallied around her. Neighbors brought meals, her sister stayed weekends, and teachers sent supportive notes. She drew strength from their kindness. She refused to back down, no matter how loud the threats or how high the stakes. One afternoon, during a particularly tense negotiation, Haley faced Harold across the long boardroom table. He sneered, "You're nothing. You think you can walk back into our lives and take what you want?" Haley met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't want your money. I want my children's rights. You don't get to erase them just because it's inconvenient for you." Harold slammed his fist on the table. "You're making a mistake." Haley smiled, a quiet, dangerous smile. "No. I made a mistake ever thinking you could define our worth." Outside, the story made headlines. Mother battles billionaire for children's legacy. Public opinion began to shift. Haley received letters from women who'd been cast out, from children denied their names, from strangers who recognized the fight. The world watched as the Masons fractured. The pressure reached a breaking point. Scott's business partners began to worry. Investors called meetings, concerned about the scandal. Julia filed for separation, citing irreconcilable differences. For the first time, Scott saw his empire crumbling, not from Haley but from everything he'd allowed to fester and rot. In the darkest moment, Scott visited Haley's apartment, desperate. He found her at the kitchen table, bills and legal papers spread before her, exhaustion etched in her face. "I never meant for it to go this far," he whispered. Haley looked up, steady. "You never meant for any of this. That's the problem." He sat, shoulders slumped. "What do I do now?" Haley placed her hand over his. "You stand up. You fight for your children, not for your father, not for the name, for them. And if you can't, at least don't stand in my way." That night, for the first time, Scott didn't run. He stayed. He listened as Noah raged, as Nora cried, as Haley read bedtime stories and kissed them goodnight. He saw the cost of his choices, the pain, the resilience, the family he'd nearly lost forever. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside those walls, a new power was taking root. Not the power of money or legacy, but the quiet, unbreakable strength of a mother and her children. Haley knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, she believed they might win, not by destroying the Masons, but by proving that true legacy isn't given. It's claimed every single day. The sun had barely risen over Manhattan when Haley sat in the kitchen, paperwork spread across the table, the twins quietly eating cereal at her side. There was a heaviness in the air, the sense that today would decide everything. She pressed a kiss to each child's head, holding them close, whispering the same words she'd said every morning since their world began to unravel. "No matter what happens, you belong." Across the city, Scott dressed alone in a silent penthouse. Julia was gone for good now, her absence leaving the place colder than ever. He stared at his reflection, the lines on his face deeper, eyes sharper, older. For the first time in years, he felt his priorities shifting, not toward profit or power, but toward the possibility of being forgiven, of building something real. By midday, the Mason Tower was in chaos. Reporters gathered outside, desperate for a headline. Lawyers swarmed the lobby, files clutched tight, tension thick in the air. The boardroom was packed. Harold, his legal team, shareholders, the twins, lawyer Scott and Haley, calm and determined, Noah and Nora at her side. Harold opened the meeting with icy authority. "This family has always been built on tradition, on strength. We do not bend to threats or blackmail." Haley met his gaze, unshaken. "No one's asking you to bend. We're asking you to honor what's right." The lawyers argued, citing clauses, contracts, the family trust, and the foundation's bylaws. Harold insisted the twins were illegitimate, outsiders. The lawyer Haley had hired, relentless and meticulous, presented the mountain of evidence. DNA tests, school records, timelines, even letters from doctors confirming the truth. Every challenge Harold posed, Haley's team knocked down. When Harold tried to change the will again, the judge overseeing the case stepped in. "The law is clear," she said. "Noah and Nora Mason are the biological children of Scott Mason. They are entitled to all rights and privileges of the Mason family. Any further obstruction will be seen as contempt of court." Scott found himself at the center of the storm. His reputation hung in the balance. Investors whispered about instability, and the media painted him as a villain who discarded his wife and denied his children. For the first time, he spoke, not as Harold's heir, but as a father. "I made mistakes," Scott admitted to the room, his voice steady but low. "I let pride and fear drive me away from the people who mattered, but I will not let this family, my family, be erased to protect an image. Noah and Nora are my children. Haley is their mother. That's not something I'm willing to hide or deny anymore." The room fell silent. Even Harold, for all his bluster, could only scowl, knowing the world was watching. Outside, the media had their story, Mason heirs vindicated. Mother's fight for justice ends in victory. But the battle didn't end at the courthouse. There were new battles, press interviews, opinion columns, whispers at every function Haley and the twins attended. She didn't care. Every time someone tried to undermine her, she looked at her children and remembered. Every sacrifice, every lonely night, every moment she fought to keep them safe. She walked into every room as herself, unapologetic, unashamed. Noah and Nora adjusted to a new world of privilege and expectation. Some days they loved it, the trips, the gifts, the sense of belonging. Other days they felt the sting of old wounds, the whispers about their past, the cold stares of people who'd rather see them disappear. Haley stayed close, reminding them, "You are not defined by their opinions. Your worth comes from who you are, not who accepts you." Scott tried to make amends. He asked Haley's forgiveness, tried to be present for the twins, and learned the rhythms of their lives. Sometimes he failed, still clumsy with emotion, but he kept trying. He showed up at school events, cheered at games, and helped with homework. He and Haley shared careful, quiet conversations, never the love they once had, but something new. A respect, maybe even the beginnings of friendship, forged in the fires they'd survived. Harold withdrew from the company, his influence fading as the board sided with Scott. The Mason empire shifted, no longer just a legacy of men, but a new foundation, one built in part by a woman who refused to be erased. For the twins, the change was dizzying. There were new rules, new responsibilities, and the weight of the Mason name. But there was freedom, too. Trips to Europe with their mother, late-night talks, the kind of love that was never again conditional. Haley built a scholarship in her mother's name, started a foundation for single mothers, and made sure her children understood the power of giving back. The story made the rounds for months, then faded, replaced by new scandals, new headlines. But in quiet moments, when the world wasn't looking, Haley would watch her children, bright, resilient, still laughing, and know she'd won something greater than money or power. One night, as the city glittered beyond their new apartment, Noah asked, "Are we Masons now, Mom?" Haley smiled, pulling him close. "You always were. No one could ever take that from you. But remember, you get to decide what that means, not them. Not anyone." Noah nodded, understanding more than most adults would. As the family moved forward, Haley never forgot the years in exile, the pain and the struggle. She carried them as lessons, not wounds. She was no longer the woman who waited for love, who measured herself by a man's approval. She was a mother, a survivor, and, at last, her own person. Outside, the city roared on, but inside their home, the true legacy was already growing. In the months after the court decision, the Mason name became a battleground for meaning. The world knew the story: Scott's betrayal, Haley's resilience, the twins' hard-won place in the family empire. But inside the Mason circle, scars lingered. The family was fractured, and the pieces did not fit together the way they once did. Scott Mason's life changed in ways he never expected. With Julia gone and his father's shadow fading, the penthouse felt enormous and empty. Every evening, he wandered its silent halls, passing photographs that no longer told a comfortable story. The world outside demanded answers, but inside, Scott asked himself harder questions. How had he become so cold? How many apologies would it take to heal what he'd broken? He started to show up, quietly, in ways that took time for the twins and for Haley to trust. At first, Noah bristled. He'd learned to protect his heart, to distrust easy gestures and empty promises. Nora watched from the sidelines, quick to see the cracks in Scott's armor. But Scott didn't give up. He picked them up from school, awkward in the drop-off line. He learned their friends' names, cheered at soccer games, and sat through school plays, even when the audience whispered. At first, every encounter was stiff, filled with old pain and fresh doubts. But Scott forced himself to stay, to listen, to admit when he didn't know what to do. Slowly, something softened. Noah started asking for help with homework. Nora let him braid her hair, giggling when he fumbled. Haley watched these moments with cautious hope, proud that her children held Scott to a standard that demanded more than money or a famous last name. Scott struggled with guilt. Every time he saw Haley, at school events, foundation galas, family meetings, he wanted to apologize again. She always heard him out, but she never let him off easy. They became co-parents, then collaborators on projects that mattered to the twins. In private, they talked about the past, sometimes laughing, sitting in silence as memories twisted between them. There was no rush to forgiveness, no pretense that love would fix everything. But in the honest spaces, trust grew, not the blind faith of young romance, but a respect earned through fire. Harold Mason, defeated by the courts and the press, withdrew almost entirely. He left the city for his country estate, the old power now just a memory. The company board quietly shifted, installing Scott as chairman with Haley's approval. Shareholders found themselves backing not the old guard, but a new Mason vision, one that included Haley and the twins, one that could survive scrutiny because it was finally honest. The press eventually lost interest. New scandals captured the city's attention, but Haley's foundation flourished. She became a voice for women who'd been silenced, for mothers who fought for their children's rights. She stood on stages, told her story, and watched as others found the courage to claim their place. For the twins, life was no longer split between two worlds. They visited Scott on weekends, helped Haley with charity events, and traveled, in the summers to places Haley had only dreamed of as a young woman. They grew into teenagers with opinions and hopes, arguing with their parents, loving fiercely, never doubting their worth. Haley thrived. She built friendships, explored interests beyond survival, dated on her own terms, and laughed with her children. Her relationship with Scott became a careful piece, sometimes warm, sometimes complicated, always grounded in their shared love for Noah and Nora. One autumn night, as the family gathered for dinner, Scott, Haley, the twins, and Haley's sister, the laughter was easy and unforced. Scott raised a glass, meeting Haley's eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly, and she understood he meant for everything. The fight, the forgiveness, the faith that something better could grow from so much pain. After dinner, as the twins played music in the next room, Haley and Scott stood on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Scott spoke first. "I thought I knew what legacy meant. I thought it was a name or a building or a number in a bank account." Haley nodded. "It's what you leave behind in people, what you teach your children, how you show up when it matters." He nodded, swallowing back emotion. "I'm grateful you never stopped fighting for them. Or for yourself." Haley smiled, soft but strong. "I didn't fight for your name, Scott. I fought for my children's future. And mine." They stood in silence, the past heavy between them, but no longer unbearable. In the months that followed, their lives moved forward. Scott rebuilt bridges with his children, with Haley, and slowly with himself. He changed the culture at Mason Industries, built in transparency, put women in real positions of power, and funded initiatives that supported single-parent families and women's rights. His business recovered, steadied by new trust and public goodwill. Haley's foundation changed lives, but most importantly, it changed hers. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had survived exile, heartbreak, and public scorn, and built something lasting, something whole. Noah and Nora flourished. They were known for more than their last name: creative, compassionate, unafraid to speak their minds. They made mistakes, rebelled, and came home again, always certain of their family's love. And in the city where her story once began and nearly ended, Haley stood with her children, unashamed, undefeated. The legacy she left was not one of money or scandal, but of strength and truth. The fire that once nearly destroyed her family had forged something better, a new beginning. A new kind of Mason story, one built on honesty, forgiveness, and the power to rise again. 10 years after Haley's world fell apart, the city was alive again with spring. The sharp edges of old pain had softened into memory, the wounds healed into quiet strength. In their new apartment, overlooking Central Park, sunlight spilled onto the kitchen table where Noah and Nora sat finishing homework. Haley moved among them, humming, planting kisses on their heads, pausing to read a line or answer a question. There was laughter here, real, simple, and earned. Scott arrived for dinner. These gatherings were now a comfortable routine. He brought stories from the company, from his own attempts at being a better man and father. The twins, now teenagers, shared jokes and plans for summer, each so different yet fiercely loyal to each other and their mother. Haley watched them, her heart full, knowing this peace had been built from years of fire and tears. After dinner, as the city glowed beyond the windows, Haley sat with the twins, their hands entwined. They spoke about the past, not with regret, but with the honesty that comes from surviving and growing. Noah asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" Haley smiled. "Sometimes. But I wouldn't trade what we have now. You are both the proof that the world can try to break us, but we get to decide who we become." Nora said, "People at school always want to know what it's like, to have a famous last name, to have so much attention." Haley squeezed her hand. "Your name opened some doors, but your kindness, your courage, your heart, those are yours alone. Never let anyone make you feel small. You're not here to impress them. You're here to live your truth." They talked late into the night about dreams, about choosing their own paths, about never accepting anyone else's limits. Haley told them, "Family is who shows up, who stands by you, not who claims you when it's easy. We fought for our place, not because we needed the Mason name, but because no one has the right to erase us." The next morning, Haley and the twins walked through Central Park, the city awake and bursting with life. Reporters no longer followed them, neighbors no longer gossiped. They belonged, not to a legacy, but to each other. Scott met them by the lake, smiling, changed by his own hard lessons. He'd earned a new kind of respect, not from titles or wealth, but from his willingness to face his failures, to show up for the people he'd once let down. He stood beside Haley, shoulder to shoulder, their past a bridge, not a wall. Noah tossed a football, Nora spun in the grass, laughter rising in the crisp air. Haley watched, filled with gratitude and awe, not for surviving, but for thriving, for turning heartbreak into hope, for building a life on her own terms. She turned to Scott, voice low and steady. It wasn't about the money or the name. It was always about dignity, about teaching them that the world doesn't get to decide who we are. We do. Scott nodded. "You taught all of us that." The twins ran back to their parents, breathless. "What now?" Noah asked. Haley knelt between them, gathering them close. "Now? We live. We love. We write our own story." As the sun rose higher, Haley led her children from the park, their shadows long on the grass, the city stretching out before them, a future that was finally completely theirs. The past no longer haunted her steps. The world would remember the Mason scandal for years, but Haley and her twins would be known for something more: their courage, their love, and their refusal to let anyone else define their worth. She smiled, strong and free, and whispered to herself, "We don't need anyone's name to know who we are, but the world will never forget it. True worth is not given, it is chosen every day, by the way you live, the love you give, and the boundaries you protect. Money and reputation mean nothing without respect, self-belief, and real family. You are never powerless unless you surrender your voice. The world will judge you, rewrite your story, and sometimes try to erase you, but your resilience will write the ending." If this story moved you, if you've ever had to fight for your dignity or your children, or if you believe in choosing your own path, comment below. My worth is mine to decide. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Leonardo Stories for more powerful stories that remind you no one else gets to write your ending.